I will do the generic housekeeping first. This place is made of brick, concrete, stainless steel and water. It's not going to catch fire. If it does, out that hole.
Yeah.
That's the way we're going. Toilets, if you need them during the tour, there is a accessible toilet just through that door, and then on your left or background through the bar, there's men's and women's round that way. So, my name's Will. I'm the head brewer here at Milestone. This is Phil, who's one of the brewers here as well. He's going to kind of mingle, help out if there are any extra questions while I'm going. So, just a little background on me. You'll notice already, love the sound of my own voice, so please do ask questions, please interject if I'm going over something too quickly or too slowly, tell me to hurry up or tell me to go back over something. So, grew up in a little fishing village on the Essex coast, went and did a chemistry degree, then did a master's in brewing science. This is now my fourth brewery that I've worked out, third as a head brewer. Did have a little blip during lockdown where I was a research scientist for a brewery process aid manufacturer. Managed to get some papers out of it, got to do some research. Great fun. So you guys will have been on, I would imagine, hundreds of brewery tours between you. Really?
First one.
Oh wow, okay.
First
right,
one.
well,
Mm-hmm.
well, I was going to say, I'll glaze through the process and we'll go through the process and what all of our tanks here are doing, and while we're doing it, go through some of the science, some of the reasons why we do some things, because not often on tours do you actually get the chance to go, here's some more of the real in-depth stuff, here's what's actually going on. Usually it's a history student who's sort of learned his script and is going to go through it. So I'm going to bumble through trying to do science with you guys. So it all starts off quite naturally on the third tank, and it starts off with our water. So here at Milestone, we use mains water, but depending on the beer style, depends on what we're going to do to the water. So you may have heard sort of the term Burtonisation or Burton-on-Trent. It's really the home of British brewing, and they have these fantastic aquifers that run underground, 61 deep, 61 metres deep, hence their beer 61 deep. 61 metres deep, and it has run through the Peak District, and it has picked up all these wonderful salts. It's got all these chlorides, these carbonates, these sulfates, and these give a really salty, like a really heavy water profile, which makes them fantastic for doing British bitters. The style of beer that comes from the area usually suits the water pretty well. So if you go out into Ireland, well, they're famous for their stouts, and their water is very chlorinated. They have high amounts of chlorine in there, and that really suits the mouth with that sort of creaminess that comes from a stout, and it really accentuates some of those malt-based flavours. And then you get something like the Pilsner. I'm on the Pilsner at the moment. With their water out in Pilsner in the Czech Republic, next to nothing in it. It's been filtered out, there's really nothing in there, which lends itself to make really crisp, refreshing drinks that really don't, that have that refreshing, that have that crisp, but really don't have much body or much mouthfeel to it. So depending on the beer style, we're going to treat our hot water. I'm going to call it liquor, quite a lot. You'll see on the tanks they say liquor. I do just mean water. That's what brewers call water. That's going to eventually be used in the brewing process. So we'll take our hot liquor and we will mix it over in our mash tun. So our mash tun, it's just a big insulated container that's got plates on the bottom. We can show you up there in a minute. It's got plates on the bottom, it's just got some holes in. And now we're going to mix 2.7 litres of hot water to 1 kilo of grains. And this moves me on to the second ingredient in the brewing process. This is malted barley. And when I say malted, that's a cereal grain that's been tricked into germinating. So if you were to just use raw barley, you haven't really got access to all of the things that we need. When we malt it, we don't do it on site. Maltsters will do 50 to 100 tonnes at any one time. That'll take us several months to get through there. So when you malt a cereal grain, you trick it into germination. So you get it wet, you dry it out. You get it wet, you dry it out, and eventually it'll start to grow little rootlets, and it will start to break down its starch supply as if it was getting ready to grow, as if it was getting ready to use that starch supply as energy. So we malt it, and then right at the end, we run it through a kiln. We want to stop those enzymes from breaking down any further. We want to stop it from using its energy supply, because we want its energy supply later in the brew. So it will start off life looking like a slightly cooked cereal grain. Yeah. Now we can't get into that cereal grain, so we need to crush it. And here at Milestone, we have a perforated plate mash tun, which just means a plate of stainless steel that's had old school in there. You can get ones that deal with slightly finer crushes of malt that look like wedge wires, or in Germany you'll have things like Lauter tuns that are designed to deal with really, really fine crush grains. But here we use quite thick crush. Now, in fact, pretty much all of the beers I can see here use about 90% of a basic pale malt. It's been cooked with a medium moisture content, and it's been cooked to about 180 degrees to just give it a basic bit of colour, basic bit of biscuit colour. So I'll pass this round. You'll smell things like in your beer, anything that smells like kind of Ovaltine, light amounts of biscuit, you'll start to get the smell from it. You can eat it, and you'll get that flavour from it. You will be picking malt husks out of your teeth for the remainder of the talk. We use malted barley because it has this fantastic supply of starch, and it has these great 3 enzymes that we're going to play with. We have alpha amylase, beta amylase, and protease. British maltsters, way better than maltsters in Germany, way better than the American maltsters. We don't really have to worry about the protease. Most of the protein's already been broken down in this malting process. It's the alpha amylase and the beta amylase that we're interested in. So when we mix about 2.5 kilos...
So what's different in our process that we have to worry about?
They are very, very big on vetting the grains that come through first. So malting barley sells for a premium in the fields because they are particularly high in starch content, but they have also got these very strong endosperms that have very dense amounts of the enzymes that we're going to use, as opposed to in Germany they'll use less. And the steeping and heating process that we use at the start of germination, we've optimised it a lot better here. They've probably caught up by now, but it's very traditional that we have a little bit less monsters there. Everyone had a chance to smell it?
Yeah.
So we're going to mix 2.7 litres of water to every 1 kilo of grain. Now we use anywhere between 350 kilos to 450 kilos of grain in our mashing process at 6:15 in the morning. So think of us when you're waking up that early, because it's bloody hard work. So anything that tastes of biscuit has come from that. I'm seeing some bitters around, I'm seeing some of the slightly darker beers. That would have come from something like the crystal malt. So the germination processes remain the same, but at the end of it, they'll roast for a crystal malt with a slightly higher moisture content in the grain and to about 270, 280 degrees. And you start to produce these more caramelly, nutty sort of flavours. So I'll pass that around. You'd still need the majority of your grains to be that pale grain, because that's got the right amount of enzymes that we're going to utilise later. But this will pick up your nutty, maybe 7 to 8% of your beer might be made up of this grain instead. And then when we start to move into the world of stouts, you cook the living daylights out of your malt, and you produce things like black malts, chocolate malts, or you just straight up roast some barley. So that'll give you some really dark colours. Just for your sort of, for the camera. In relation, for colour, we use a unit called EBC, European Brewing Convention. And a pale malt will have an EBC of about 3. That crystal is crystal 400, so it has 400 units of colour. And this chocolate malt will have about 1,000 units of colour. So we only need to use very small amounts of this to get a really deep colour into your beer. So we're going to pass that around. Has anyone tried all 3 yet? Anyone managed to taste all 3? No. I'm still chewing through the first one. Very soon the other one I'm still chewing through. So we mix those grains in our mash tun. As I say, 2.7 litres of hot brewing liquor. Our tank is sitting at about 80 degrees now, I believe. When it mixes at 80 degrees, we are looking for an optimum temperature of 67 degrees Celsius. Don't ask me what that is in Fahrenheit. I did learn it for an American tour once, but it's gone in one hour. We will use Celsius, we'll use centigrade in here. And our optimum temperature in there is 67 degrees. Now 67 degrees finds a nice balance between favouring beta amylase and alpha amylase. Beta amylase likes it to be about 62 degrees, alpha amylase likes it to be about 72 degrees. So we go somewhere in the middle. If we go heavy on the sort of 62, 63 on the cooler end, we favour that beta amylase and we get a very fermentable wort. Beta amylase takes this big starch chain and chops it into little units of 2. And little units of 2, the yeast later is going to eat up those units of 2, is going to eat sugar, pee alcohol, fart CO2. If we go slightly higher, we favour alpha amylase, and that just chops that starch up randomly. And if we get randomly, we get lots of sugars, lots of chains of sugars that the yeast can't eat, and that gives you the mouthfeel. So things like stouts that taste a bit thicker in your mouth, we'll have mashed them at a slightly higher temperature, because we are looking for that less fermentable wort, we're looking for a more chewy, thicker pint. So we've mixed probably in the realms of about 1,000 litres of water at this point, and it's sat in our mash tun for about an hour. You sit there longer, you start getting more enzyme activity, and eventually all of that starch will break down into sugar and you'll get a very, very thin beer. Any shorter than that, and you're just left with very, very sweet beer at the end. Actually, one of the trends that people are looking at with low alcohol beers is doing very short and very high temperature in there, so you still get that malt character without getting too much fermentable sugar. But I think if you want a non-alcoholic beer, it's called Coke.
Yeah.
So it sits in the mash tun, and we drain about 1,000 litres of it off into our copper. Now, we here at Milestone produce about 2,300 litres with every brew, so we need to introduce some more water at this point. So we'll do something called sparging. So we've been left with these grains, and you see these grains, they've got lots of the malt husks are still attached, and lots of the starch has now been dissolved into the liquid, and they form their own natural filter bed. So we'll have, it sits to about, where does it sit in the mash tun? About halfway up, when it drains out. And at this point we've got a spinning arm on top, and we'll pour more hot water over the top of it. It's like taking your filter coffee, you get an espresso at the start, if you keep pouring water over it, you keep getting more out. So we're trying to wash all of that sugar, trying to get the most of our solution that we can out of our mash tun. So we'll pour about another 1,500 or so litres over the top, to end up with a very full copper that's got about 2,000 litres in it. That's just a giant kettle. It says copper on the front of it. It is a giant kettle. You can see inside because we cleaned it yesterday, so you can see inside. It's just got a giant heating element inside there. Ours is a kerosene element. Really good for getting very quick heat. Boils it up nice and quickly. So at this point, we're going to take what's called our sweet wort. Tastes kind of Horlicksy, kind of Ovaltine at this point, and we are going to introduce the third ingredient. These don't look like your traditional hop anymore. Your traditional hop looks more like a pine cone than this. We use something called T90 pellets. The 90 meaning 90% of the hop matter is retained, and they get rid of the stems, the bits that we don't really want much out of. So we're going to start to boil our wort, our sweet wort, and you boil it for a number of different reasons. You can insolubilize some proteins that you've dragged through that you don't really want. You don't want that protein, you don't want that meaty, almost marmitey flavour coming through in your beer. We're going to boil it as well so we can change the pH. You'll pick up a little bit of colour. You've got protein, you've got sugar in there. It's exactly the same reaction that happens when you cook a cake. You get Maillard chemistry going on, you get that browning, you get that almost cooking flavour that can start coming through. Now stronger beers like your traditional English barley wines, you'll cook for like 3-4 hours in there. You'll boil it for such a long time because you're trying to concentrate it, and you're also trying to pick up those really caramelly sort of flavours that you'll get from cooking sugar, from making your own caramels. Hop varieties grow all around the world, only in very specific bands, and I always get latitude and longitude the wrong way around. The one that goes round the world, latitude. They only grow in specific latitudes because the hop plant needs specific day-night cycles. Now British hop breeders, and this will be our British hop, make fantastic hops for making British beer styles. They make great things for bitters, they make great things for sessionable pales and bits like that. So they favour flavours like spicy, resinous, piney, herbal sort of flavours. So this is a variety called Goldings, one of the most traditional ones, one of the first one introduced to the UK. And if you haven't smelled, don't eat these ones. They're really just super bitter, it tastes horrible. But you can get some, I get kind of, I don't know, a little bit of sort of piney, a little bit of herbal sort of smell. If you follow that band around the Northern Hemisphere, you get to the Yanks. And the Americans make very American flavoured sort of hops. For your American style beers, like your Neepers, your New England IPAs, your leaning into the tropical fruit side of things now. So this is a variety called Mosaic. And if you just smell Goldings, this is going to smell Polar Opposite. I get the sort of more mango-y kind of pineapple smells out of this sort of thing. It's really your citrusy, like your stone fruits. And that'll be in things like, if anyone's had New World yet, that uses an American variety called Citra, and that unique smell comes from
a bit bitter taste, that, wouldn't it?
If you go into the southern hemisphere, the Argentines starting to get into the game a little bit, but not sort of fantastic varieties quite yet. You go to New Zealand, and I say the country grows hops for their beer styles. New Zealand doesn't really have beer styles, and you can tell because their hops go all over the shop. You can get some that are like blackcurrant, you can get some that are like, what's next one? You call like pineapple?
Pineapple, mangoes.
Yeah, you can get one that's
the best hops in the world.
So it's all sort of citrusy.
They do the weird and wonderful. Nelson Savan smells like white grape and white wine when you use it, right? Weird and wonderful flavours. So we're going to stick them into our boiling wort. Now everything you can smell on the top of your beer at the moment, if you stick your nose in your beer, all of those smells are things that are evaporating off the surface of the beer. So if you can imagine, we are cooking this generally for about an hour we boil it for. Most of those smells, they've gone straight up the chimney. So what we're really getting out of our hops at the start are the less volatile compounds which introduce like your British hops, like your piney and your resinous flavours. But we also get some the bitterness, which is very characteristic of the beer. All hops contain something called alpha acids. And alpha acids just taste like bitterness, there's just a bitterness. And the longer they're boiled for, the more of these alpha acids we start to isomerize, and you start to get that true beer tasting bitterness through. We're isomerizing alpha cohumulone into ISO out of the heat. Then we can add our hops slightly later into the boiling process, and at this point we're extracting our flavours out of them, more so than we're extracting the bitterness, which is why some of those American varieties we really will just chuck in at the end. We want the flavours to dissolve and not shoot off up the kettle. This work now is called bitter work, and it is really hot. So we run it through our heat exchanger on the wall now. I don't know if you can see down the gap down there. We've got our cold water out of our cold liquor tank that runs one way, and we've got our hot work that runs the other way, and they basically swap temperatures. So we will recycle all of that boiling energy into our next tank for hot water. So we'll get about 2,000 litres of about 60 to 65 degree water when we swap those temperatures around.
How much is wasted? There's 2,000 litres in that. That's a much more than you can see. How much evaporated or boiled off or what?
We'll generally over an hour get about 70% oil loss, is kind of the general rule of thumb. So we'll start with maybe 2,100 litres fully in our tank, it'll evaporate down, we'll do something called liquoring back later, which is where we've tried to make our beer, if you were to ferment it, it would be like 5% for a 4.5% beer, so we add some more water in it just to increase the capacity and what we can get out of our tanks. It's generally what we do around here, or what we're trying to start doing around here anyway. So we've transferred it, comes out of this hose, and it will go into any one of these silver containers on the side here, which are our fermenters. Now fermentation takes place here over the course of about 3 to 4 days, depending on what beer style we're doing, slightly longer for a lager. Lager meaning the German traditional pistol cup. So we've got our fermenters in here, and we use 5 different yeasts here, depending on what beer style we're doing. You have 3 Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which are your standard ale yeasts, and we use 2 Saccharomyces pastoralis, which are your standard lager making yeast. We've got Nottingham ale yeast for most of the ales that I'm seeing around here. It absolutely rips through it. We take sugar, turn it into alcohol in about 2 to 3 days. We use, for some of the more tropical beers, I don't know if anyone had a Kushti earlier. Kushti beer is on the bar, IPA sort of style. We'll use a virgin yeast for that, a little bit slower, but you start to get, rather than just alcohol or sugar turning into alcohol, you can start to introduce other flavours like some pineapples, some mangoes, some bits like that. If anyone's got a Crusader, we've used a variety in that called a Voss, a Kvike yeast. Now in Norway, farmers traditionally did a lot of the brewing there, and they absolutely tortured their yeast. So their yeast really loves working in extreme environments. So whereas we ferment most things around 20 to 22 degrees here, Kvike yeast, 35, 40 plus, and it'll ferment overnight. You could brew on Friday, and we could have a perfectly serviceable beer on Monday.
Is that eating?
It's an organism, it's a single cell fungus. It's eating sugar, it's a happy bunny, it's getting warm. So if we were to just let these ferment, they get hotter and hotter and hotter. So each of these have different styles. We've got a cooling jacket on the back of those, the entirety of the outside of those are cooling jackets, and there's a square panel on the back of those. So as the brewery expands, you're like, oh, we need 2 more fermenters. Oh,
It's a bit cold in here.
Yeah, these are all typical. Big pardon? We don't really yet. We produce too many beer styles essentially at the moment. Yeah. Breweries I've worked at in the past, you can do what's called cropping your yeast. So for every 1 yeast cell that you picked at the start, you would generally get 4 yeast cells. They don't work like our cells. We have mitosis going on in our cells, the cell splits. Yeast cells, you have mothers and daughters. So they form buds on the outside of the cell wall, and eventually they break off. So you can reuse the yeast. However, we do have yeast. Oh, yeah. Which one's that one? Yeah, so this is probably nearly finished fermenting. In fact, Phil's going to check at some point during the day. No, you don't have to do it for show, but at some point during the day, Phil's going to check to see if this beer is fermented or not. So when we start, we've got lots of sugar that's come through, and the yeast is going to eat that sugar, and we can then tell from the density of the liquid how much sugar's left as to whether or not we've gone from all of the sugar to all of the alcohol. If we do all the alcohol we want to. We do that, and it's just got a little, it's called a hydrometer. It floats in the liquid depending on how dense it is. We can tell from the starting amount of sugar to the end amount of sugar how much alcohol we've got. So this is probably finished fermenting now. And you can smell the yeast off the top of that. It's very, yeah. I wouldn't suggest drinking this one because yeast in your insides don't mix great. Tastes lovely.
A bit cloudy,
yeah. And you live on yeah. My wife, not a fan of me. So we finished fermenting, we have our alcoholic beer, but at this point, in one of these fermenters at any one time, if it's fully finished fermenting, we're looking for 1 million yeast cells per milliliter per potential percent ABV. So there's about, in one of those tanks, currently about 20 trillion cells of yeast. Nobody wants to drink 20 trillion cells of yeast, so we need to get that out. And this kind of depends on how you're going to package the beer at the end as well, where you're going to get your carbonation from. So we're on Camra Social here, we're all big fans, we know what our cask is, right? You've still got some sugar left in the beer, so the yeast is going to still eat that sugar, and it's still going to fart out CO2. So if you put it in a sealed container, so we've got seal at the top and seal in there, it's still going to fart CO2, but it's got nowhere to go, that CO2, so it's dissolved in the beer, and that's where you get your carbonation from. And then if you want to get the beer out, you put a hole in the end, you put a tap at the bottom, and as the beer pours out, or as you siphon and you put effort into pulling the beer out, beer's drawn through and air replaces it at the top. Or, and I completely forgot it now, you can put your beer into keg. Now keg beer is generally filtered, so we've taken the yeast out and we've force carbonated. So the colder a beer is, and the more pressure you apply to it of CO2, the more carbon dioxide you'll dissolve into it, the more carbonation you'll get. So your traditional Belgian beers are very high carbonation. They'll be looking sort of 3 to 4 volumes of CO2, which is weirdly 6 to 8 grams per litre of CO2 dissolved. Your British and cask styles, we're looking nearer 1.2 to 1.5 volumes of CO2. So we'll take our keg, we'll filter out the beer, we'll filter it, and then we will force carbonate into keg. And that is my attempt at a science-based tour of what on earth is going on in your beers.
Fantastic, that. Thank you.
When you carbonate, when you get that carbonic acid taste, is it too much?
So,
I know, I've heard someone do with nitrogen.
yeah, so it's so dependent on what you want out of your beer. So things like Guinness will be 70-30, it'll be 70% nitrogen, 30% CO2, because nitrogen produces smaller bubbles. And when Guinness have used all sorts of other different bits in their mash tun at the start, so they get some really nice tight-knit protein bubbles as well. It's the protein that forms that bubble. Which is why I love seeing all these hipsters that have all these wax and starches brewing beer, and the second you put that wax on that beer, you're going to kill the head. It's going to absolutely eat the protein, it's going to kill the head, so they're, I'm a big fan of that, wax and starches. Actually, you're flattening your beer completely.
Can I just ask?
Yeah,
so starting the process to boil in the cask,
Yeah.
I've got in my mind that's about 5 days.
Yeah,
Is that about?
Yeah, you're not far off at all. So we will produce what goes into a fermenter in about 8 to 9 hours, depending on how much filtration clog up the heat exchanger. And we'll ferment in there 4 or 5 days, it'll be down. When yeast ferments, it produces something called VDKs. They're called visceral diketones. They taste kind of butterscotchy, almost, and it's characteristic in certain British beers, but it's generally considered an off flavour in most. So you generally want to hold once your yeast is finished fermenting, it will then uptake that VDK again, because it needs it as part of its amino acid synthesis. You might hold it for another day, you might not. So generally finished without VDK in about 5 days. And then you go in cask on day 6 or 7, but it's still flat, and actually casks are stored at like 12-13 degrees in a pub cellar. It takes a little while for that yeast to properly ferment and get that CO2 to get the bubble in there. So maybe another week or 2 in cask. It's generally what I try. But the boss will send it out the next day and it plugs the limit.
But it's in a pub cellar there for a week or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's building that condition.
What sort of lifespan do you put on it? When it leaves here, you put a date on, don't you?
Yeah. Beer that's on yeast, beer that's still sitting on yeast. The big bit of the research that I was doing when I was at Murphy & Sons was about flavour stability and oxidation. Yeast is fantastic. The second that oxygen gets into beer, yeast will eat it, turn it into sterol synthesis, which makes it cell wall, which means it will start producing again. So you're protected from oxidation. The more the temperature that it stays at, and it will start to stale.
Do you buy your own yeast in or do you refill your yeast bottle?
I'm really trying to get our own yeast. I really am. But we dry up a lot of our beer and it contaminates the yeast, so you couldn't reuse it on the next one, or if you use a dark beer yeast, that slurry is generally a lot darker. You stick it into New World and you've turned it into a brown beer instead, if you're not careful.
Can I say, while on the yeast, I remember I used to have brewer's yeast tablets, brewer's yeast.
Yeah.
So do you have sort of spent yeast or?
Yeah.
What do you actually do with it?
Tons of it. So you can repitch, unfortunately here, it makes good pig feed, and if you've ever had...
There's some fat pigs around here.
You've got to be super careful giving yeast to pigs now. I've heard You never know how much truth or how much hyperbole is behind it. You hear stories of pig brewers selling yeast to pigs, and there's still a bit of sugar left in that solution that ferments inside the pig's stomach, so the pig starts to swell, and you get bacon here, bacon over there, it can go really bad. We unfortunately just end up getting us. But it is something that I would like to do.
Don't you use finings at all then?
So we will do in cask. It depends on what we're looking for. So
What
yeast,
finings do you use then?
we use isinglass. Isinglass is our go-to. So yeast cell wall has a big negative charge around it. If we're going back into fundamentals of chemistry, it's a negative charge around the cell wall. Isinglass is a big collagen structure. It's a big positively wound structure. So it helps bind larger particles, and larger particles will settle out quicker. You can use, we do use for some of our naturally hazy ones, a vegan alternative called Super F. I mean, traditionally back in the day, you could use things like what's the one that comes from pig? Gelatin. You can use gelatin. That's the bit.
Fish bladder as well.
That's what isinglass is. Yeah.
Oh, it's isinglass.
Yeah. It comes from the swim bladder of tropical fish. When I used to work at Murphy and Sons, they make their own isinglass. Good Lord, that shit smells. It's absolutely vile.
It's a swim bladder, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is, yeah.
My argument with vegans, and I know many are vegan, unfortunately, their argument is always, it's an animal product, we can't use it, but actually that bit just go in the bin if not. It's using waste product. I think it's a great thing to be using.
Very fascinating me. Who first discovered, let's take the swim bladder out of the fish and see what we can do. Who first thought of that?
The same guy who thought natural things were really tasty.
Yeah. Cow's milk, yes please.
And you know now it's hot pellets rather than the hot flour.
It's the flour, yeah.
Is there waste from the hops, so the spent hops you stuff? What went to farmers, I think, or did it go for fertiliser?
It makes great fertiliser as well.
Yeah.
What you get is you don't just have that spent hop anymore. You have the spent hop, and because you've boiled it, you've made a lot of the proteins that have come off of the cells in the in any of your molds, and you get this thick protein layer coating around the outside of it, so you're not just getting spent hops, which makes it excellent for. Yeah, there's not that much nutrition in the hop matter, but it's that protein that hop matter's also got bound in with it. It's fantastic for it. Like I say, it makes great fertiliser.
So we're talking 2,100 litres of water start, and the entire process of dairy to top coat and everything. At the end of it, how many time do you get out of that?
So if you haven't got a board of us, this is tracking what's going on in anyone's life. It's very technical. It's a great So we'll have contents in our tanks in and around the world of 2,000 litres. So we've got Lion's Pride in one of them, we've got the Pilsner, the Hells, Pacific Islander, Little John, Cathedral Gold. From something that's got maybe 2,285 litres, I'd expect to get in the realms of 54 casks. One 9-gallon cask holds 72 pints. I'll do the maths very quickly in my head and lie to you and say it's about 5,000 odd pints. That neck of the woods, it's between 4,000 and 5,000 pints per batch. And we brew 5 times a week. Well, we did 4 this week. We'll do 3 next week because it's January and no one drinks as much in January. We could
So in terms of scale, because this is quite a big sector, small macro boiling things, someone who's, say, your Guinness for example, massive industrial scale, is it the same size equipment or you got much massive
humongous. So our mash tun is designed to take 450 kilos. They will take easily 4,500 kilos. And we'll brew 1 batch a day. The second their mash tun's empty and they've transferred it all, you get your next batch. It's almost a continuous process. They'll push out 12, 13 batches in a day. They just keep it going. They're fermenting, you have to. Whereas our fermenting will take 1 batch, their fermenting will take 6 or 7 batches. So actually, if we find after the first batch, we've got a little bit too much. When you listen to it, they can adjust and then put it going into the